I'm Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, and this is Rendering Unconscious. My guest today is Jan de Vos. His new book, The Digitalization of Intersubjectivity, a Psy critique of the digital death drive, is now available from Routledge. He recently had a virtual book launch featuring Ian Parker, David Pavon-Cuellar, David Gunkel, and others. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. Rendering Unconscious is also a book, Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. From Trapart Books, 2019. There are only a handful of Rendering Unconscious books left, so they're now on sale for only $12. Get your copy at trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/Vanessa23Carl. That's VANESSA 23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated.
Hi everybody, just to briefly introduce myself. I'm Jan de Vos from Belgium, and I've written a book called The Digitalization of Intersubjectivity, the Psy critique of the digital death drive. Maybe to introduce myself, I could refer to someone calling me a critical psychologist, I think a few weeks ago, and I was actually baffled by this title, because I don't think I would ever call myself a critical psychologist. I would even hesitate to call myself a psychologist as such, even though I've studied psychology in Ghent University now, a while ago. But actually, I think that the thing I'm engaged with is actually critique of psychology, which doesn't make me a critical psychologist, I think. So, and the point of departure of all my writings and all my work is actually to start from psychoanalysis to engage in a critique of psychology, and this, I think, reflects my the pathway that I took when entering the psychology department. Was there there is a psychoanalysis department in Ghent University, and from the very beginning, this the lectures and the people who were involved with the psychoanalysis department of Ghent University were very critical of psychology itself. So from the very beginning I entered psychoanalysis, I experienced it as a critique of psychology. And actually I also think that doing psychoanalysis, or being involved with psychoanalysis cannot but involve also a critique of psychology. That is, I think anyone, psychoanalysts and practitioners, but also theorists of psychoanalysis, cannot but engage in a critique of psychology. Well, that's basically the introduction of myself that I wanted to give.
Yeah, and I saw you also critique like neuropsychology specifically, and like this idea of like neurology in the brain explaining everything.
Yeah, well, this is maybe explain a bit more about my trajectory. I was actually worked as a psychologist, as a clinical psychologist. I worked with, for example, while I worked with juvenile delinquents, and then, well, at the given point, I encountered some fellow people, psychoanalysts, and we decided to start ourselves a little institution for youngsters and for children, and we wanted to start from a psychoanalytic perspective. But actually, I think that bringing psychoanalysis together is most often, or threatens to be, a recipe for disaster. So the whole project stalled or run against the wall because of, well, we psychoanalysts having our interpersonal problems. So that was, for me, a turning point in my wanting to go more in the theoretical perspective and try to understand what psychology is about. And this is where I engaged with a critique of psychologization, as I saw. I think I saw this process in my own youth, where psychology came into the schools, education, and things like that, and the proliferation, of psychological discourses in all terrains of life, and this I wanted to study. So this is why I wanted to do especially since reading Zizek at that point in my life, and seeing the potential, also political implications of being involved with psychoanalysis, and looking from a critical psychoanalytic perspective to society and to politics. So this is where I engaged with, and I tried to get into university back again to do a PhD. And this is where I ended up in philosophy, which allowed me more, how we say, free space or leeway to look from a different position to critical things and engage with in a critique of psychology. But of course, and this where I come to the brain, is that from from the very beginning, engaging with critique of psychology, I had the idea that psychology is the discipline or the science or the praxis that wants to escape all the subjective and all the psychological, so to say, as soon as possible. Like, for example, the typical example I always give is a psychologist. If you would ask a psychologist if ADHD is a psychological disorder, well, I think most rapidly, the answer would come from a mainstream psychologist that ADHD is not something psychological, but it has to do with the brain. So this is the awkward thing, that psychology tries to escape the psychological as soon as possible and go to the neurosciences to do that. And this is why, actually, I first wrote a book on psychologization, 2 books actually, and then the thing that I engaged with was a critique of the neurologization. So yeah, this is things that I was working on a while ago.
I'm going to have to get those because I'm very interested in that. And I must say, I mean, I love psychoanalysis and Lacanian psychoanalysis specifically, but even more specifically, I love everyone coming out of Ghent University. And, you know, there's a lot of great psychoanalysis in Paris, of course, the Irish Lacanians are amazing, in London, of course, but the Ghent guys, they've got me. I've read all Paul Verhaeghe's books, and Stephen Hewlett, and Danny Novas I read a lot, so I don't know what you guys are doing over there, but it's fantastic. How did you get to this book where you're specifically talking about the digital death drive?
Well, sometimes I say, starting with psychologization, which I actually, the signifier or the word as such, I had to, when I did my public defense of my PhD, I think I practiced like 1 hour in front of the mirror to get the pronunciation right, psychologization. So I think I got the hook of doing things with ization. So I got in from psychologization to neurologization, and then I thought, well, let's get to a third term with ization in its in the signifier. So I got to digitalization. But of course, this is like the things are I think, connected to each other in the sense that I think that the neurological turn within psychology wouldn't have happened if there were not the digital technologies to investigate the brain as such, as an anatomical thing. So there is this genealogy, and also you see there are a lot of things in the history of psychology, but also in the history of digital technologies, which intersect. Meaning that I encountered in my study of, for example, Alan Turing and Norbert Wiener, a lot of references to psychology, even to psychoanalysis. So this is where things intersect. So for me, this was like a getting into psychologization brought me with neurologization, and working on these themes, I naturally evolved to deal with all things digital and all the impact that it has on subjectivity and on society. Yep.
Yeah, and on intersubjectivity, like you said. What do you think about that?
Well, of course, it's a term which is not most readily used in psychoanalytic circles, but so I could reappropriate the term and use it in a way that I think that subjectivity as such is something social, is something which I think, especially when one rereads Freud's book, Mass Psychology and Ego Analysis, this is the idea that most rapidly in psychoanalysis came in the idea that there is no such thing as a individual psychology. Individual psychology is social psychology. So, and I think that this getting into different phenomena of digitalization of our life world, so to say, you see that these things intersect on the digital level also. For example, maybe a little example, when I, of course, with the COVID crisis, there are a lot of things going on. Also, psychologization pops up again. Of course, psychologists are trying to get their perspective on the foreground. That the whole COVID crisis and the lockdowns and the isolation things are to be understood in a psychological way, and things like that. And this is where there is also this push to the digital, like we are invited to reconnect as soon as possible via Skype, via Zoom to each other. And at a given point, I thought that what psychologists were not allowing us to do is to retreat. So you couldn't really isolate it, even if the message, excuse me, was for everybody to keep social distance and to isolate. Is that this? I thought isolation is a dangerous thing from a political point of view, because this is where you are not in the in the jurisdiction or in the you opt out, and you were not allowed. You are not allowed to opt out. You have to be connected, and this is where I think this. At least what I'm engaging now is to try to rethink mass psychology and group effects from what I call the predominance of what I call fake subjectivities, but also fake intersubjectivities of fake socialities and that the digital technologies and all the discourses around them are enforcing us into.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, reading Freud, mass psychology, group psychology right now is so important. I found myself, which I've also heard friends doing as well, like watching a lot of things about cults. It's just really, and for a recent, actually the last episode of 2020, I tried to skip 2020 there. The last episode of 2020, I just read like Freud and Einstein's correspondence, Why War, because I'm like, this is so pertinent now, and people just need to hear it and stop with all of this fake, like, oh, but we can be so productive and do all these other things now and get together this way, and look, we're all united. And even what's happening now in politics in the States, where they're like calling for unity all of a sudden after like starting an insurrection, it's just like, it's just so absurd, and I just feel like everyone needs to just like quit it, you know.
Yeah.
Quit it. But at the same time, as we saw when we were trying to connect, there is this aspect of technology where it does connect us in these ways where we're able to talk, you know, from different countries. But there's always this failure, and there's always like, even with autocorrect, these like slips. I mean, I find it amazing how you can kind of see the failure and these kinds of slips of the unconscious happening even through the technology. Maybe because it is man-made. I don't know.
Yeah. This is, of course, yeah, maybe the issue that I try to engage with in my book is also so you could have the idea that technology as such won't be able to erase like all things symptomatic, all things like mistakes or the Fehlleistung of Freud and things like that, so that it would always have a or the subject would always found its way to deal with all these things, and so the Freudian unconscious will always manifest itself. But this is what I try to at least question a bit in my book, is to ask whether the digital technologies are not, for the first time in history, capable of trying to capable of incorporating this and fencing the unconscious in and trying to get subjectivity as such within its own economy, this is where I at least ask the question whether this will not be the end of subjectivity as we know it. So this is what where I also choose for the subtitle, the digital dead drive. Basically, this is what the idea that I try to explore in my book.
Yeah, I mean, I got a chill when you said that because I think it's really true. And, like you said, that we were encouraged so quickly to keep connecting, even though we're supposed to be isolating. And there's just such a push to like keep connecting and keep this community going. But I find myself personally like making sure that I am spending less time on the computer and less time on the phone. And like when I'm done with analysis for the day, I turn everything off and everything else can just wait until the next day when I have to turn it on because I have analysis again, or a podcast. But otherwise, I've just been trying to turn everything off because I need my time, like making art or doing something, walking, doing things that humans did before all of this. And it's really getting lost. And there is this like huge anxiety attached to it, especially when I first started that practice. It started during the quarantine because I realized like otherwise we're just going to be on these machines 24/7 and not even have like the commute to work or anything in between it. Or even like work before used to be in an office sitting with a person, whereas now it's all through the computer. So I've been having to like consciously make sure that I have time away from technology, but it's really anxiety provoking and you feel like, or I feel like, I'm going to miss something or something's going to get lost or I'm going to become obsolete or, if I don't stay in touch or stay in tune with what's happening.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we found from these this recent documentary and The Social Dilemma where they've made these algorithms to make sure that people are constantly checking. And it's just like, it seems like the same mechanisms as like gambling are in play, where you're constantly checking and they pop up new notifications to make sure that you keep checking. But now they're saying like these algorithms have kind of gotten out of their own control and they can't really make it less basically for people.
Yeah, so the documentary myself, but I was wondering, of course this is like the problem that I had with the documentary is like is that all the people involved were like the, how do you call them, the sorceress apprentices who have this knowledge of how people can be seduced and how they can be lured into addictive behavior and stay connected and that they can capture the attention and so the whole idea actually I think underpinning this documentary is that there is it's like evolutionary and cognitive behavioral psychology, which they master and which they use to then manipulate the people. But of course, from a psychoanalytic perspective, this is problematic in the sense that we tend not to agree with the evolutionary and cognitive and behavioral psychology. We have something, let's say, I always argue that psychoanalysis is a non-psychology, is a science and a practice of the accepting the impossibility of a psychological science and a psychological praxis. So this is where I would argue that actually the what is realized there is like a fantasy, is the lie of psychology. I argue that is like substantiated in a whole digital environment from where there is no escape. So my argument is it's not that it is not the case that they have they know the secrets of how the human psyche work and that they use it. No, it's about they realize their fantasy. They set in motion a whole digital environment based on these fantasies, imaginaries of what human psychology would be, and in this virtual environment that we are captured. And well, there are a few questions, and one of the questions is, of course, is there still a way of escaping that, like we turning off our devices? But of course, this is where the novel, for example, The Circle, I think Dave Eggers comes in, which is, well, at times it's a bit of simplistic novel, but in the end, the idea, which I found very true or very worrying, is about the protagonist not able to escape the circle, the old digital thing. So, and this is where one would wonder, like reading. You could, for example, refer to Elon Musk's idea of the neural link, and Slavoj Žižek writes also about that, and the idea of the singularity, which would then capture all things subjective within the system, and actually then in my idea that this would be the subjective entropy, the end of subjectivity as such.
Yeah, that Neuralink is terrifying.
Yeah.
I remember seeing, it was in the 90s where they had like people being able to control. Someone took me to this place that had like an isolation tank, a sensory deprivation tank, and all these different kinds of things. And they had like this thing where they would put these electrodes on your head and you could play this like skiing video game where you were skiing by just thinking of how you wanted to move. And that was like in the late 90s, so can't even imagine what they're doing now.
Yeah.
Will you talk more about the death drive and how you see it? Because I hear different things from different people, and I always find it interesting.
Well, I think during my book launch with Ian Parker, I confessed that I actually do not understand anything of what the death drive as such is. So the whole Freudian theory and Lacan reworking it, and I really have troubles to get my head around that. So I think in my book I actually engage or try to get my own different ideas about what the death drive is in a psychoanalytic perspective, and try to look at different sides. But I'm not sure if in the end I succeeded in using it in an appropriate way, in the sense that sometimes I know I get bogged down in the idea that digital death drive is the idea that people want to, or human being longs for or desires the total passivity and things like that he longs for that. While of course Lacan has reworked that and shown that a more Freudian way of looking at it is connected to repetition and to the drive as such. So this is where the whole thing of the digital the the dead drive concept flips around, and for me, it's that's where things get incomprehensible for me. But anyway, I think in my book I try to play a bit with these different approaches of the dead drive, and actually the whole thing that I try to make clear in my book is if subjectivity is something that in the end is based on like a zero level of subjectivity, which is referring also to something outside of subjectivity, which, well, in a more, if I'm allowed to psychologize it a bit, in that I am myself because there was always a point outside myself, which, well, this is the basic, some black hole from where all things subjective might be sucked in, but also where they actually also see light. So this is where I asked the question whether it would be, because capitalism and now digital capitalism, I think, moved to turning subjectivities and intersubjectivities into its basic commodity, which is its capitalism is always on the move of trying to incorporate the outside, starting with the colonies, the other world. So now it's basically at the point of sucking in subjectivity itself. And this is where I ask the question, when it is this now the final frontier of incorporating the otherness? So this final frontier where the whole thing will come to, and I call it somewhere in my book, a screeching end. So this is where the productive outside is incorporated within the system, and this is where the system would come to a halt. So this is eventually the wager of the use of the title, The Digital Dead Drive, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting and terrifying. Yeah. But I think it's a really good point. And I ask about the death drive because I love that about psychoanalysis, and I love how we can continue to grapple with these ideas, and there isn't any like one way to look at everything. And I feel like as soon as someone comes along and feels like they've really like locked down, like this is how it works, and there's this the way people are, this is hysteria, this is the way the unconscious is, there's always loopholes, there's always a way around it, there's always something that confounds that idea, and it just keeps working. So so I get wary when I meet anyone espousing to be a psychoanalyst who thinks they know exactly how everything is. Yeah. Because there's always something to the contrary.
Yeah.
Otherwise this wouldn't be happening, and it would all be inert. Yes.
And actually, just actually by coincidence, I've got to read some things of Nestor Bronstein. I don't know if you know him.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and he's. I must say to my. I'm a bit ashamed to say that I didn't know him before, but I got in contact with him, and he's actually working on similar things. So he also connected the starting from the Freudian book, how it's called, Beyond the Pleasure Principle, and actually working on the same theme of the digital environment leading us to repetition. And he also mentioned somewhere that the debt drive. So it was very interesting to see that other people also try to use the same rich Freudian literature in order to grapple the things that we are now dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I've seen Nestor Bronson speak in New York a couple of times at different conferences. It's really fantastic. Like one of those people that you hear and you have all those aha moments. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Mm-hmm. And maybe you could talk about your recent event that you had this book launch with Ian Parker and David Pavon Cuellar and just so many great people.
Yeah, well, actually, all of these people were involved in initial phases of the book, in the sense that they read parts of different chapters. So there were already important interlocutors to where I made a lot of use of their comments on previous versions of my book. So this is what, bringing them together in a virtual book launch was the only way to, because I wanted to do a book launch, of course, in vivo, in reality, but that didn't. Was one of the possibilities, so we organized like this virtual thing, which I very much like doing.
Yeah, and we can link to it. I'll put a link to it in the text so that people can see that as well.
Yeah.
Well, how did you first meet Ian Parker, David Pavon Cuellar? How did they end up reading parts of your book?
Well, Ian Parker was I met him quite some time ago, 15 or 20 years ago, in a conference on I think state regulation of psychoanalysis. So, and I had written something about psychoanalysts like Jacques-Alain Miller and their politics in trying to negotiate with the psychological field and the field of psychotherapy, which is, I think, well, on the one hand, maybe necessary to survive, for psychoanalysis to survive, but otherwise I think it entails a very great risk, as I would argue that there is some radicalness in psychoanalysis being a non-psychology, being like the symptom of psychology, it's itself being something else than psychotherapy, and so the idea of negotiating I found very troublesome. So this is I wrote something about that, and Ian Parker invited me for a conference, and then when I started my PhD, he became one of my external supervisors. Of course. Actually, for me, he was one of the most principal supervisors. So, and well, what Ian Parker is also good at is bringing people together, connecting people. So this is where I went to conferences, and I met with people like David Pavon Cuellar, and I think some other people also from the same circles. Yeah, I think for me it's always important to connect worldwide and to see what's happening in for example, in Latin America. This where I because I also write in Spanish. It's like Freud sent the plague around, but for us, from a continental Europe perspective, it's sometimes we have to look for the plague somewhere else, for example in Latin America, to refine the critical potential of psychoanalysis.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of fantastic psychoanalysis happening in South America.
Yeah.
And like Patricia Garavici in this book I edited on psychoanalysis and violence, Patricia Garavici had a piece about psychoanalysis in Argentina and its relation, why she was thinking that it was able to flourish so much in a place that had so much upheaval and revolution and such a like dictatorial government, as a way that to subvert that, as a way to have a voice and still have subjectivity under such extreme duress and extreme conditions, which I thought was really interesting. And then, of course, Nestor, like you mentioned, and David, and there's Fernanda Magallanes, this really fantastic in Mexico City as well. There's so many.
Yeah.
And then of course Lacan Salon. If I could get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to go to their study groups, I surely would. And maybe 10 years ago, I probably would have done something like that, but now I can't. But Clint Burnham and Hilda Fernandez, everybody's so fantastic. So what are you doing now?
You mean my research or my work?
All of it.
All of it. So, to begin with, at this point, I'm lecturing critical social psychology in Cardiff University. That's a temporary job, so I don't know what will happen after that. But on the research, or the things I'm reading and writing about is, on the one hand, what I already mentioned. I'm rereading mass psychology, and I'm invited to write about that for the journal, how it's called, Politics and Psychology, or International Politics and Psychology. Don't remember. And the second thing I'm engaging with is actually there is this book of Nestor Brownstein from 1975, I think, Psychology, Ideology, and Science. But now David Pavon Qualier has brought some people together around Nestor Brownstein to rewrite the book, and and it will have the title Psychology, Ideology, Science, and the Suppression of the Subject, and it will be published in Spanish, but also in English, and maybe also in French. So I have, I think, 2 chapters that I should write. So this is a very I'm really looking forward to start writing and to get involved with this re-edition of a book that seems to have been very important in Latin America.
Yeah, and that's definitely very important now.
Yeah.
It's a great time to revisit that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about mass psychology as you're reading, and its relation to what's going on today politically and digitally and socially?
Well, in general, the idea, of course, is I'm struggling with it in the sense that if you see, for example, Trump saying to his followers that he loves them, that they are very special, and then I saw someone on the street shouting at Trump, "I love you," or "We love you." So it's like we say, gefundenes Fressen. but I don't know what is in English. It's a German term. It's like it's ready made to be understood in the Freudian sense of a libidinal attachments of members of the group, allowing with the leader allowing to people on a horizontal level to identify. But at the same time, there are a lot of things that might be understood in a different way. Also, the idea that the whole digital technology is not about mass formation in the Freudian sense, but is like more the aggregating of people via algorithms, which is a totally different form of grouping or bringing people together. So this is where the defiance, on the one hand, is to rethink group formation and mass formation in contemporary times. But then again, I think this is only possible by critical rereading Freud and seeing that that in his writing there is already a lot of nuances involved in how to understand the position of the leader, which I think will hopefully allow to rethink what is happening in digital times and these times where like Slavoj Žižek also said, the obscene leaders enter the scenes, which is might be a different type of leader than the leaders that Freud discussed.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're sure seeing a lot of that.
Yeah.
That's for sure. Yeah, and that also reminds me, when you mentioned before with the algorithms and them thinking they've like mastered, cognitive psychology and manipulating groups and individuals. I really hate it when they constantly say like, we know you better than you know yourself. We know you better than you know yourself. It makes me angry.
Yeah. So that is the thing that well, the paradoxical thing is that or the digital algorithms and things like that, and the claims that they know us, they know our feelings and our thoughts, is that we actually, it's like a paradox. We are not robbed of our thoughts and our feelings and our everything psychological, but we are robbed of our unthoughts of what, or maybe we should also speak from about unfeelings or not feeling or being totally. Well, the whole unconscious thing is not something substantial. It's not something positive, but we are actually also try to deal with in my book. We are robbed from our absences. So we are supposed to be fully present, and the whole digital thing, algorithms draw us and make us eternally present. So we are robbed from our absences, our non-psychological core, so to say.
Thank you for listening to Rendering Unconscious. You've just heard a discussion with Dr. Jan de Vos. His new book, The Digitalization of Intersubjectivity, a Psy Critique of the Digital Death Drive, is now available from Routledge. For more, visit his website, janrdevos.weebly.com. That's janrdevos.weebly.com. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. From Chapart Books, 2019. For more, please visit our publisher's website, trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. For more information, you can also visit my website, drvanessasinclair.net, or the podcast main website, renderingunconscious.org. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. Color and texture. In the darkness, all cats, and wiggling her butt in the entranceways. Crime against nature.
Could when we,
Such are the terrible
of the
expressions.
I
The
looked,
mythology himself.
where was the mother?
The sharpness of
It is
wisdom
the bones
turns
and the
upon the
screaming
sage.
have abused.
Wisdom,
You should be
annihilation,
now inside
must
you.
also expect
You
to
consider
experience the
offering
dissolution
her your
of
body
night
instead.
into an,
The Catholic Church. So
which
this
would be
is a high.
particularly great
Would you die
in a
for
baby
these
who had
ambivalences?
a.
I
This,
looked
in
further
some
down
measure,
on
explains
career,
the development
friends,
of his early
causes, pieces of
Miss
flesh.
Teenage America
You
was stoned,
set down the pencil.
glazed,
One, she
that
said,
conveys a
you may
sensuous
keep
state
one
of certainty,
as a keepsake. All
apparatus
others must
that allows
go.
me to reminisce
Of expressing anxiety and grief,
on the
and
grass
aggressive
or the scalding
impulses,
tops of
nor
parked cars.
depressive. An
Action
outlet.
was turned
It
into a
is of
conscious
interest
attempt
that
to disseminate this vision,
homelessness, but also
we
to taste
place to create,
like piping hot. When
ultimately, God was a bit
our
of
true self,
a failed
a
agent,
facet of
provocateur,
death. For
ritual.
her work, she requested that.
There is the last of the night and the beginning of the red.